Productive Pastor 75, my basic productivity stack. Welcome back, y'all. Productive Pastor, episode 75. Y'all, can we talk about how many episodes that is? We kicked back in a year and a half ago, roughly, and it has been a ride. And I'm super excited. I tried to say stoked and super at the same time just then. I'm super excited about where we are right now in the podcast. We've got some killer stuff coming this episode. Just talking about some of the basics of productivity, but also how these basics aren't just basics. They're not things you forget, but they're things that we build upon. So we're going to jump into that in just a second. There's also going to be tons of stuff in the show notes, repchadbrooks.com/PPP/075, because we got a lot of episodes that we can talk about. 75 episodes worth of stuff. There's other ways you can chase this stuff down. I want to make sure you know about that. So remember, cruise over to the show notes, repchadbrooks.com/PPP/075 if anything sound interesting to you. Before we jump into that, a couple of things first. Number one, the Trello course has been out for a few weeks, and people are loving it. I love seeing, and this is the thing I love seeing. I love seeing people buy it. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, honestly, that's super cool. But what's more fun is I can see how people are working through it now, and when people sign in to get access to those Trello templates that are part of that course as well, I also get an email notification. So I love every day when I get into my email, those 2 or 3 times that I get into emails, I'm seeing updates from people that are moving through the course. That's honestly really, really cool. If you've got the Trello course, keep your eyes peeled for an email over the next couple of days. We're going to try to do a Zoom meetup for people that bought it just to hang out, but also to find out more stuff, to answer questions, just all this sort of thing, because that course doesn't belong to me. That resource belongs to the community, to all of us here at Productive Pastor. So thank you so much if you purchased it. And if you're now starting to think, Chad, this Trello thing sounds cool, go over the show notes, go grab the link, buy the Trello course, jump in with all of that stuff that's going on. The second thing is this. I've been writing about preaching calendars this month on the weekly emails, but also on Twitter a lot, because we're at the time of the year to where people are thinking about what their preaching for the next year is going to look like. And so, cruise over, grab that stuff. I want to hear about your preaching calendar. Where are you? What are you thinking about preaching about? What are the stuff that's coming up in your 2024 rhythm? That's just interesting to me. I'd love to see that. So make sure you go to the show notes, subscribe to the emails, follow me on Twitter, and let's have this conversation about preaching calendars together. So before we jump into this idea of my basic productivity stack, there's a handful of related episodes that you might find to be helpful. Episode 16, I talk about my digital toolkit. I made the switch from primarily analog to almost all digital about 3 years ago. And I'm glad I did. I'm still tempted. I was telling my wife earlier this morning, I still feel the need to buy A5 notebooks, especially those A5 Mujis, which I swore by for years. I still want to collect them, but I don't use them anymore. I really am almost all digital, and I go through how I do that in the digital toolkit episode. Episode 29, I share my 3 favorite productivity tools. And there's a little bit of overlap back and forth between those two things, but I share my favorite productivity tools. We love to see inside of people's toolboxes. That is one of the super cool things about Productive Pastors. Whenever we get into one of those nerdy conversations where we just get into the things that people find useful, the ways that people do all of that. I love that part. I enjoy that a lot. So there's an episode about my favorite productivity tools. Episode 61, and this is going to be kind of what we're going to kind of go into today. This is a core piece of content for my understanding of productivity, how I teach productivity, but episode 61 is about working and keeping systems. And I've talked about that a lot. I've talked about that in the Becoming Productive course. I've talked about that in the Trello course. There's a whole episode about it. I've done some YouTube live streams about it, but the whole idea of working and keeping is a big deal to me, because all productivity needs places to both work and to keep. That's the basic idea. And we can get really, really overboard, but essentially this kind of goes into the 3 just basic things that I think that I need and that you need in a productivity is a relationship. And part of it's going to be this always a back and forth between your working and keeping, that sort of thing. Because in a lot of ways, it's the question about how am I working? And there's going to be specific tools that go into that, the day-to-day, the way we do sermon preparation, the way we think through things. I don't know about you. I like to make charts. I'll talk about that later on. But then also, how are you keeping things? For me, I was all the writing and stuff I've done about my own sermon calendar, and that sort of a thing. I still use Evernote as a keeping system. I don't like it that much anymore. I'm frustrated. I wish I could move to Apple Notes, all that sort of thing. But when I look at what I actually require, my bare minimum, Evernote still works for me, and so I stay there. It's my keeping system. And so all of that whole content piece is going to feed into it, because this is the idea. You have to learn how you work, because the way that you work is going to be different from the way that other people work. So I hope when you hear people like me talking about productivity, or if you're online and I hear somebody else talking about productivity, what I'm hoping you're hearing is people who've been experimenting with this for years. Like I've been obsessed with, how I work. And what does it mean to do things? What does it mean to do important things, things that drive me, things that keep me at my best, all this sort of stuff I've been thinking about now. Pushing 20 years, I've been thinking about it intentionally, at least for a decade, if not 15 years. But the ways that we work are going to drive the way. So these are the pillars that I think I have. These are the pillars, this kind of basic stack that I suggest to so many people, because it's going to help you understand how you work. It's also going to help you understand how you develop how you work. And then also, these are basic practices. I think these are core practices. When people come to me for coaching, and I do a lot of productivity coaching, and they have nothing going on whatsoever at all, and things are absolutely cattywampus, and they're nervous about it. These are the systems I kind of drive them towards, but these things evolve, and they're also things that I go back to and I use almost on a daily basis. And so it's kind of like you have to learn to walk before you can run. All these things they're like walking. They're skills, they're basic skills that you learn that you continue to evolve and use throughout the rest of your productivity journey. So my basic productivity stack, I've got 3 things to share with you about this. And these aren't going to be surprises, but I hope you hear how they're interrelated in important ways. The first one is this. It's the time audit. Now, episode 2, when the podcast came back, was about a time audit. In the first iteration of Productive Pastor back in the 2017, 2018, I talked about time auditing a lot. I have created multiple iterations of the same day sheet. For 10 years now, it is the single most downloaded thing in the history of me putting things to download on the internet, is the day sheet. There's a link to it in the show notes. You can go ahead and download. Now, the latest version of that, I also have a whole module about it in the Becoming Productive course, about there's 3 different levels of time audits. And so clearly I am obsessed with the idea of a time audit. And what it is at its most basic is a practice where we simply keep track of our time. And that's all it is. We are just keeping track of our time. It helps us understand focus when we're dealing with distractions a lot. It helps us refine our work and learn how much time does it take for me to do X or Y. This is super helpful when we say yes to things. We know, I'm saying yes to something that I know is going to take me a couple of hours. I'm saying yes to something that's going to take me 25 hours. When we are overwhelmed and we feel like something should have been done by now, if we practice regular time audits, we can look back in our notes and we can see, wow, I'm overwhelmed, and this is a big task, but I've only given it 5 or 6 somewhat focused hours over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks. So of course I'm going to feel overwhelmed. I do a time audit, or at least begin with that time sheet, that day sheet, at least 2 days a week. And I'm going to be honest with you, if I did it every single day, I know my life would be better. But for the days where I know I'm sitting down behind my desk and I am working all day long, I'm not on coaching calls, I'm not doing that sort of a thing. I almost always get it. If I know I have a day where I have got to focus on a handful of absolute critical tasks, I'm going to do the timesheet. Out of all of the things that I keep up with, the timesheet is just so critical. In regards of where we are on our productivity ministry journey, that time audit is going to be a tool because it helps you focus your work and be aware that you are getting done what you declare to get done. So if you want the latest day sheet, cruise over the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/075. There'll be a link to where you can download the latest version of the day sheet, also Becoming Productive course, and then episode 2. Those links will be in the show notes as well. But this is one of my basic things in my stack. The second thing in my stack is this. It's the brain dump. Now, the brain dump is unique because the brain dump is something you can do once. The brain dump is something you can do every quarter. The brain dump is something you can do every day. I'll be honest with you, if someone is feeling like they've got way too much going on and things are behind and just stuff is, yet again, cattywampus, go do a brain dump. And this is why I love brain dumps. Brain dumps help you clear out a cluttered mind. I've got a free 5-day email course called the 515 course. There'll be a link to the show notes that's specifically for pastors who feel like they've lost control of their schedule. And the first thing we do is a brain dump. Because brain dumps help you make sure that you're on task because they help you to not have to carry all of that stuff. They help you filter tasks. If you feel overwhelmed and you do a brain dump and you realize that there's like 25 things that you are carrying in your mind, you can do the brain dump, get all those things out there, and then you can start filtering. This is the stuff I can do in 5 minutes. This is the stuff I can do in an hour. This is the stuff that's going to be a multi-step process and might take a couple of weeks. But once I have it on there, I can get it broken down into easy to digest pieces of work. The brain dumps are huge. I think doing a brain dump at the beginning of a week or at the end of every week is part of my own like shutdown rhythm. Is like or is the brain dump. I feel like a brain dump is one of the best strategies. It's like a superpower that we can activate in our productivity because there's something amazing about getting everything out of your mind. And you might think having a page full of things or multiple pages full of things or a bunch of Post-it notes on the wall or a covered whiteboard, however you choose to do the brain dump, or bullet points inside of Notion, I don't know, however you do your brain dump. You might think that that's overwhelming, that that's scary, that whole process is something that might seem just overboard. But I'm going to tell you, it makes things feel better because you're emptying out the space. And when you empty out that space, you're creating space for your brain to then be working and focusing on what actually matters. So that brain dump is the second thing in my basic productivity stack. The third thing in my basic productivity stack, and there is a whole episode about this, but it's my working notebook. Episode 34, the superpower of working notes. If I go back to the beginning of my productivity journey when I realized, hey, I've got to begin keeping things, but then also I have to have a place to do other things. It was inside keeping a working notebook. And y'all, I can go back to 2005, I think, when I was an intern in campus ministry. I had graduated college. I was waiting to go to seminary. And it was the first time I was able to focus on something 40, 50 hours a week. I was also reading tons of books and having conversations with people. And I began to see just just how I work being developed. And I learned I've got to have a place to keep to-do lists, to keep appointments, to kind of keep track of my work. But I also have to have a place where I can think together. It was that working notebook. And I know I've got those first couple of notebooks in a box somewhere. And I'll be honest with you, I think I've saved every single notebook I have ever used. And for me, working notes, it's a strategy behind it. So not only are you keeping your schedule in there, you're keeping your plan for the day, you're also keeping the things that you're thinking about, the stuff that jumps out, notes from conversations you have with people. For me, like I said earlier in the episode, I diagram and chart things out. I almost think through things in terms of charts. And my working notebook now lives inside of GoodNotes 6. And I've got PDF templates for every single thing you can imagine inside of it. All the templates that are used from the Becoming Productive course are dropped in there. All of my sermon creation templates, which y'all might have seen pictures and stuff of. I don't think I've ever shared those out publicly. All of those sermon preparation templates are inside of GoodNotes. I've got templates for meetings. I've got templates for reviews. I probably have 60 different templates I've created over the years that I use. I have meeting templates. If I have a one-on-one with somebody, if I have a group meeting I'm part of, I've got one of those in for somebody. I've made stuff for those. And if you look at it, I literally start every month with a brand new notebook. And that's why I love the digital side of this now, is because I have all those templates inside of there. I can pull that meeting in. I can pull that sort of thing in there. If I'm reading somebody else's document or a PDF or that sort of thing at work, it gets drug in there. So nowadays, for years I use that Muji A5 for my working notebook, and I think there's 48 pages in there. Now it's not uncommon for my monthly notebook to finish out the month with 200 pages in it, between the things I've imported, the things I've added, the templates I've used, and just the way that I work and process through things. And my kind of own personal rule is every single thing I do goes in the working notebook. My show notes that I'm reading off of right now as I record this episode are inside of my working notebook. And that's made things really easy for me to go back and find. And so, that idea of we keep this by month. So it's not I do this notebook and I finish it, then I put it up. It's literally a month by month by month. It's easy to find. I put an index at the front of it. I do that index at the end of the month as I kind of close my month down, as I build out that index, what that is. And then typically I copy that into Evernote so I can search it as well. But your day-to-day matters. The way that you do your time tracking, like I said, I drag in my time audit template into the working notebook. Think about the ideas that you have. Think about if you read something in an article that you think might be really, really good for a sermon one day, or a quote or something. All the time I will write down the things that somebody says in a conversation, and I will drop that into that working notebook. Also, think through the things that you need to think through. So much of this for me, and I learned this even a couple of weeks ago as I was inside of a Clifton Strength certification class. So many times, if you have a strategic thinking strength inside of your top 10, and what's so funny is all the folks I have coached over the years that come through Productive Pastor, they typically have multiple strategic thinking strengths as part of it. It's kind of almost the avatar for the people who listen to this podcast. It's fascinating. But that means we work by thinking through things. We work by thinking about it. And so that working notebook matters to me tremendously, because how I process through all of those things. So those three things are my basic productivity stack. It's the practice of keeping a time audit. It's the strategy of brain dumping. And I brain dump every single time my mind begins to be full. There's all sorts of stuff I do after the brain dump, and that's a future episode. That's where I get into Trello with a lot of times with that sort of stuff, but just the practice of brain dump. It matters. And then lastly, that working notebook. I take my iPad with me everywhere. I go through the tool set inside of episode 29, my 3 favorite tools. But I keep my iPad and my Apple Pencil with me everywhere because of that working notebook. Because I got tired of hearing or thinking or something happening, and I want to save it, and I don't have my notebook. And it's just going to be a lot better that way. So that's my basic productivity stack. But I hope you can tell how those practices have been with me for a really, really long time, but they continue to refine. They continue to affect my productivity as much as I love Trello. If you can't tell by now, massive, huge fan of Trello. It's not on this list. I like it. I love it. I need it. But even these 3 practices, the time audit, the brain dump, and the working notebook, they inform Trello. Trello's complete working system for me. So do this. Hit me back on social at RevChadBrooks.com, at RevChadBrooks. Let me know what are your basics. What is your basic product stack? If you're in the Productive Pastor community on Facebook, come on and share there. Hey, these are the things I have to have no matter what. This is what I've developed. This is what I've refined. This is what works for me. Let's keep this conversation going. So until next episode, thanks so much for being part of things. Thanks for being a supporter of the show and all the other stuff. I'm Chad Brooks. I will be back with you in the next episode.